Welcome back to Cherish Ephesians 6:4, and the next four videos or four plays in this playlist is about my story, finding forgiveness and joy in Christ Jesus. And I begin in part one. I grew up in the small town of Jamesport, New York. I would describe it as pretty much a middle-class town where most of the economy was driven by the local farming of potatoes and cauliflower. It was a wonderful area to raise a family and traditional in its values and surrounded by beautiful beaches. My mom and dad were religious, hardworking people who did whatever was necessary to provide for their brood of 5 children. My dad never made it through high school, but he had a tremendous work ethic and sometimes found it necessary to work 2 or even 3 jobs. Earlier in our family's life, he worked in the bowels of the New York Times as a photo engraver. But when we moved to the East End of Long Island, he found work in the local jail, did some painting on the side, and eventually went to work driving one of those now famous brown trucks for UPS. My dad also built the home we lived in, a sprawling 3-bedroom, 1-bath home of about 1,200 square feet that never seemed to be too small for the 2 adults and 5 children that were living there. For my first 8 years of school, I attended a private religious school and achieved what my parents expected from all of their children, straight A's in every subject, all the time. Because of that academic success, as well as a behavior which appeared to be quite angelic, I was made president of my class every year and given special privileges by the teachers. Rather than respond with a heart of thankfulness and humility, I grew to believe that I could manipulate people quite easily as long as I showed them certain behaviors. These early years were also formative in me believing the great American mantra that you can be whatever you want to be, which implies your destiny is in your own hands. Nothing like building a heart and mind full of pride and early humanistic thinking, thank you. Approaching the high school years, I had fallen in love with the game of basketball, and thanks to the genes that I inherited from my super athletic father, I began to become quite proficient. I also had learned to set goals, so during the next 4 years of high school, my goal was to become the first member of my family to attend college and to do it on a full athletic scholarship. I finished high school with many accolades and did receive offers to play basketball in college. I was a quote-unquote big man on campus at Riverhead High School. The college I chose to attend was a school in Connecticut because the coach was friends with my high school coach. This later turned out to be a disastrous decision. Arriving as a freshman at college, my immediate prospects for continuing as quote-unquote big man on campus were good. The basketball program was the number 1 sport at the school, and I was going to be in the starting unit on the varsity squad. In my mind, I was projecting fame by the time I was a senior. This would have been a good time to have a heart filled with thankfulness to God, but I did not know him. After years of church-going and religious schooling, I knew some things about God, but I did not know him in a way that made me want to obey and love him. I was a hard-hearted, prideful, self-centered young man. I was blind to seeing God's kindness to me, his love, his provision, and his protection. This is what theologians have called common grace. That is, the kindness of God to all people, even those who ignore or despise him. My wonderful little world did not stay wonderful for long. I plunged headlong into partying, alcohol, promiscuity, and foolish behavior. I was creating a new reputation, one that may have been enjoyed by some, but despised by others. Or should I say, despised by one in particular, my coach. I believe he was aware that many of the jocks on campus got a little wild, but when the school newspaper made mention of me personally in an article, he was furious and my relationship with him was destroyed. After 3 years of riding the bench and seemingly never being able to exit his doghouse, I resigned my scholarship and never played in my senior year. So much for fame in my senior year. Something else happened of note during those first 3 years. Frustration from my dreams being hammered led to even more crazy behavior. Day after day, I tried to figure it all out and fix it, but I got nowhere. Then one night during this time of desperation, I was approached by a Christian group that invited me to join them. I shared with them my troubles, and They shared the gospel with me. I wanted so bad to be free of my troubles. I decided to accept Christ, and immediately upon doing so, I was filled with so much energy that I literally had to run around the dorm building for several minutes. In the weeks that followed, I attended the Bible studies and I began going to church. However, it wasn't long after that the people in the group began to seem weird to me. I lost my desire to go to church and I stopped hanging out with them altogether. Guess what? False conversion. I had been living in an emotional nightmare and I was frantic to end it. It seemed Jesus was the answer, but he was not. I never asked myself and answered the right questions that the gospel demands. Did I see my sin? Did I see the need of God's forgiveness through Christ? Did I count the cost? No, I just wanted a tonic for my woes. One last thing happened as I approached my final year of college. I had already met a beautiful American Indian woman about a year or so earlier. Myself and a few of my buddies had just closed down the campus bar. Yes, we had a bar on campus. And we were roaming the streets, singing and carousing like idiots when we came upon one of the girls' dormitories. It took only a few minutes before a couple of the resident assistants came to the front of the building to threaten us with a call to campus security, and there she was. Little did I know that God had sovereignly brought us together, and we would be married just a couple of years later. We finished our senior year dating and married just 10 days after graduation at the fresh young ages of 20 and 21. And we had plans. We knew so much about what we should do, or so we thought. The new plan was to work super hard and make lots of money. My basketball idol was ultimately crushed, and now I had a new idol, money and all of the happiness that money could bring. Stay tuned for part 2.